Have you ever noticed how the most significant decisions in your life, the ones that could have led to profound joy or meaning, were silently vetoed by a whisper so familiar you barely recognized it as separate from your own thoughts? They'll say no. You don't belong there. Who are you to try? We stand at the edges of dance floors, relationships, career opportunities, and creative endeavors, convincing ourselves we're making rational choices, when in truth, we're prisoners to the most primal fear that survived our evolution: the terror of being cast out. What if I told you that the life you're living right now, the conversations you have, the clothes you wear, the ambitions you pursue or abandon, is not the life you would choose if rejection held no power over you? That the person you believe yourself to be is actually a carefully constructed shelter, built to minimize the risk of hearing the words, "We don't want you"? The fear of rejection operates like gravity, a constant force so omnipresent we've stopped noticing its weight. It shapes our movements through the world with such subtlety that we mistake its limitations for our own natural boundaries. Consider how you entered this room today, who you made eye contact with, who you pretended not to see. Notice how your voice changes depending on who's listening, how certain thoughts remain forever unspoken, trapped behind the dam of anticipated disapproval. This isn't personality, it's protection. Our brains evolved in tribal environments where rejection meant death, literal banishment from the safety of the group into the wilderness alone. The amygdala, that ancient watchman of our brain, doesn't distinguish between a social slight and a predator's approach. Both register as threats to survival. When someone turns away from your extended vulnerability, your body floods with the same biochemical alarm that once prepared your ancestors to fight or flee from physical danger. This is why rejection feels like a small death in evolutionary terms. It once was. We construct elaborate lives designed primarily not for joy or meaning, but for rejection avoidance. The career chosen not for passion, but for parental approval. The opinions expressed not from conviction, but from calculation of what will keep us safely within the boundaries of social acceptance. The dreams abandoned not because they were impossible, but because the path toward them contained too many opportunities for others to say, "No." We mistake this avoidance for wisdom, calling it being realistic or practical, never admitting the trembling fear beneath our choices. Nietzsche wrote of how humans would rather will nothingness than not will at all. In the architecture of our avoidance, we see this truth. We would rather actively construct a smaller life than risk the pain of being denied the larger one we truly desire. We become architects of our own confinement, designing days and relationships with rejection-proof materials, building low ceilings above our ambitions, narrow doorways for our self-expression, and thick walls between our authentic desires and the world that might deny them. Consider the last time you felt truly alive, that rare moment when you acted from genuine desire rather than calculation. Perhaps you spoke an uncomfortable truth, pursued someone who captivated you, or created something with no guarantee of approval. Remember the aliveness that coursed through you? That wasn't just emotion. It was the brief liberation from the constant energy expenditure of rejection avoidance. Most of us spend our lives like nations under sanctions, carefully rationing our authentic self-expression, never experiencing the prosperity of emotional freedom. What conversations have you rehearsed endlessly, but never initiated? What talents have you hidden? What desires have you denied, even to yourself? The tragedy isn't just in the opportunities missed, but in how we internalize each avoidance as evidence of our limitations, rather than recognizing them as monuments to our fear. We begin to identify with our constraints, forgetting they were self-imposed. "I'm just not a public speaker," we say, rather than, I've avoided speaking publicly because rejection there would feel unbearable. The most insidious aspect of rejection fear is how it disguises itself as identity. After years of avoidance, we no longer recognize the difference between who we are and the strategies we've employed to protect ourselves from others' disapproval. We mistake our armor for our skin. The quiet voice that once whispered, "They might reject you if you try this," gradually transforms into, "This isn't really who you are anyway." The prison becomes so familiar that we defend it as home. Perhaps most painful is how we reject parts of ourselves before others have the chance. We become our own first and harshest rejectors, disowning desires, silencing voices, and amputating ambitions before they can grow large enough to attract attention. We perform this self-rejection with such habitual efficiency that we no longer notice the violence of it. Like an animal that chews off its own limb to escape a trap, we sever connections to our authentic longings, never questioning whether the trap was real or whether the sacrifice was necessary. Kierkegaard understood that anxiety arises not from our limitations, but from our freedom, from the terrifying responsibility of choice in a world without absolute certainty. Rejection fear is existential at its core. It confronts us with the fundamental separateness of consciousness. No matter how clearly you express yourself, how vulnerably you reveal your inner world, you cannot guarantee that another will truly see you, understand you, or welcome you. This gap between consciousnesses, this inability to merge completely with another, is the philosophical wound from which rejection fear bleeds. We are meaning-making creatures trapped in bodies that will die, seeking connection with others similarly confined. When we reach across the void and our gesture is denied, we face not just social discomfort, but existential terror. Each rejection confirms our fundamental aloneness in the universe. This is why small rejections can trigger disproportionate pain. They momentarily illuminate the ultimate human condition of separation that we spend most of our energy trying to forget. The party invitation declined becomes, in our emotional body, evidence of cosmic isolation. The philosopher Martin Buber distinguished between I-it relationships, where we treat others as objects to be used or managed, and I-thou encounters, where we meet another as a complete subject with their own interior world, as rich as our own. Rejection fear keeps us trapped in I-it relating. We approach others strategically, managing impressions, calculating responses, treating them as potential sources of validation or rejection, rather than mysterious consciousnesses to be genuinely encountered. We sacrifice the sacred possibility of true meeting for the security of controlled interaction. Consider how much of your self-presentation is authentic expression versus strategic performance, the carefully curated social media identity, the resume that emphasizes what impresses rather than what impassions, the dating profile designed to maximize appeal rather than reveal truth. We have become marketers of ourselves, treating our personalities as products to be positioned for maximum acceptance, minimum rejection. In this commodification of the self, we lose the possibility of being truly known, truly loved, for how can another love what they haven't actually seen? Jung spoke of the shadow, those disowned parts of ourselves that we hide from consciousness because they contradict our chosen identity. Our rejection fear creates an especially dark and populous shadow, filled with all the authentic aspects of ourselves deemed too risky to reveal. The wild creativity, the uncomfortable opinions, the unconventional desires, the need for solitude, the capacity for rage, all exiled to protect us from others' disapproval. Yet these exiled parts don't disappear. They sabotage our relationships with their underground influence, creating the very rejection we feared by ensuring no one can ever fully know the fragmented self we present. What makes rejection so unbearable is not the practical consequences, but the story we attach to it. Their no means I am fundamentally unworthy. This interpretation transforms a single instance of non-connection into evidence of an essential flaw in our being. We experience rejection not as information about a specific mismatch of needs, desires, or timing, but as confirmation of our deepest suspicion that we are, at core, undeserving of love, belonging, or success. This is not logic, but mythology, the personal mythology of unworthiness that rejection fear both creates and confirms. The philosopher Camus suggested that the fundamental philosophical question is whether life is worth living in the face of its inherent absurdity. Similarly, rejection fear poses the question, is vulnerability worth risking in a world where connection cannot be guaranteed? Is it better to live safely unexposed, or to risk the pain of rejection for the possibility of being truly seen? Most of us answer this question not through conscious philosophy, but through unconscious habit, defaulting to protection without ever experiencing enough genuine connection to make an informed choice about its value relative to its risks. The cruel irony is that our strategies to avoid rejection actually make it more likely. The authentic self possesses a natural charisma that our curated performance can never achieve. When we present only our calculated, rejection-proof aspects, we become generic, forgettable. One more person skillfully playing the social game rather than bringing the irreplaceable perspective of a unique consciousness to the encounter. People are drawn to authenticity precisely because it is so rare. Yet our fear keeps us competing in the crowded field of the carefully constructed rather than standing in the open ground of genuine self-expression. Awareness itself is the first act of liberation. Simply noticing how rejection fear shapes your choices, without judgment, without immediate demand for change, creates a small but significant space between you and the fear. In that space lives the possibility of choice. Notice how your body feels when you contemplate potential rejection. The tightness in your chest, the subtle withdrawal of energy, the rehearsed explanations already forming in your mind. This noticing doesn't eliminate the fear, but it prevents you from being unconsciously controlled by it. There is profound difference between feeling fear and being fear. When rejection anxiety rises, most of us immediately become it. Our entire consciousness collapses into the sensation, the narrative, the avoidance impulse. But what if you could experience the fear while maintaining awareness of yourself as the container of that fear rather than its contents? This is the fundamental shift that begins the journey from rejection avoidance to conscious vulnerability. Not the absence of fear, but the capacity to hold it within a larger awareness that remains free to choose. Viktor Frankl, surviving the concentration camps, discovered that between stimulus and response lies a space, and in that space lives our power and freedom. When rejection looms as a possibility, there is a microsecond between perception of the threat and your habitual response. Most never notice this gap, moving seamlessly from trigger to protection. But with practice, you can expand this interval, creating room to ask, what would I do now if I weren't controlled by this fear? Who would I be in this moment if rejection held no power over me? Consider how much of your mental bandwidth is consumed by rejection management, the constant scanning of environments for potential judgment, the rehearsal of conversations, the analysis of past interactions for signs of disapproval, the adjustment of behavior to maximize acceptance. This hypervigilance exhausts the nervous system and consumes cognitive resources that could be directed toward creativity, presence, or genuine connection. The first gift of awareness is recognizing this enormous expenditure of energy and questioning whether the protection it purchases is worth its price. Our avoidance strategies eventually become indistinguishable from our personality. I'm an introvert, you might say, or I'm just not ambitious, or I don't enjoy public speaking. Some of these statements may reflect genuine preferences, but others are simply rejection avoidance wearing the costume of identity. The quiet rebellion begins by questioning these assumed limitations. Is this truly my nature, or is it protective adaptation? Who might I be if rejection weren't a factor in my self-definition? There exists a particular kind of courage that has no name in our culture, the courage to risk being disliked. We celebrate physical bravery, endurance through hardship, moral stands against injustice. But we rarely acknowledge the profound courage required to express an unpopular opinion, to create art that might be criticized, to love someone who may not love in return, to show parts of yourself that others might reject. This unnamed courage is perhaps the most essential for a life of authenticity and meaning, yet we fail to recognize or honor it, even in ourselves. What small experiments might you conduct to test the actual rather than imagined consequences of risking rejection? Perhaps expressing a minor opinion that differs from your social group, sharing a creative effort without apologizing for its imperfection, asking for something you want without minimizing your desire. The path to liberation isn't through grand, dramatic gestures, but through these modest acts of authenticity that gradually expand your tolerance for vulnerability. Each small risk that doesn't result in catastrophe helps recalibrate your threat detection system, which has likely been set to hypersensitive for most of your life. The most subversive question you can ask yourself is, what would I do if I knew I would be rejected and chose to act anyway? This inquiry cuts through the illusion that the goal is to avoid rejection entirely. Perhaps the aim isn't to eliminate rejection from your life, but to build your capacity to move forward despite it, to hold your sense of worth steady, even when others cannot see your value. This perspective transforms rejection from something to be avoided at all costs into simply one of many experiences that may occur on the path of an authentic life. Uncomfortable, certainly, but neither fatal nor defining. There exists a paradoxical strength that can only be discovered through allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Like a martial art that uses the opponent's force rather than opposing it directly, this strength doesn't fight against the possibility of rejection, but moves with it, finding power in the very willingness to be affected. Notice those rare individuals who can express unpopular views without defensiveness, who can hear no without crumbling, who can reveal their authentic desires without apology. Their power doesn't come from invulnerability, but from having built a relationship with vulnerability itself. The capacity to withstand rejection grows only through experiencing rejection. This is the irony our avoidance prevents us from discovering. The very experiences we most fear contain the medicine for that fear. Each time you risk disapproval and survive it, your nervous system records this evidence. Rejection is survivable. Your identity can withstand non-acceptance. Your worth remains intact even when others fail to recognize it. This embodied knowledge cannot be acquired through theory or affirmation. It must be earned through lived experience. Consider the possibility that rejection isn't happening to you, but for you. Each instance of non-acceptance creates an opportunity to practice separating your inherent worth from others' responses, to distinguish between the pain of disconnection and the suffering of self-judgment that typically follows. With practice, you can learn to feel the clean pain of rejection, the genuine disappointment of unmet desire for connection, without adding the secondary suffering of making it mean something about your value as a human being. There is immense freedom in recognizing that universal acceptance is not only impossible, but undesirable. To be accepted by everyone would require being no one in particular, a blank screen onto which others could project their preferences. Your specificity, your particular combination of qualities, values, and perspectives, necessarily means you will resonate with some and not with others. The question shifts from, how can I avoid rejection, to, whose rejection am I willing to risk in order to be fully myself? This reframing transforms rejection from a sign of failure into evidence of authentic self-expression. The philosopher Nassim Taleb speaks of anti-fragility systems that don't merely withstand stress, but actually strengthen through exposure to it. Your relationship with rejection can become anti-fragile. Rather than merely developing tolerance for potential rejection, you can cultivate a self that grows more defined, more confident, and more authentically expressed through the very experiences of non-acceptance that once seemed threatening. The rejection that once diminished you becomes the resistance against which your authentic self strengthens, like muscles developing against the weight they repeatedly lift. Notice the freedom of those who have survived their worst rejection fears. The entrepreneur whose first business failed publicly. The artist whose vulnerable work was initially criticized. The person who lived through the end of a relationship they thought they couldn't survive, having faced what they most feared and discovered their continued existence on the other side. These people often display a remarkable liberation in their self-expression. They've lost the desperate need for universal approval that constrains those still organizing their lives around rejection avoidance. What if the path to genuine connection paradoxically requires the willingness to be rejected? Consider how surface-level most relationships remain when both parties are carefully managing impressions, revealing only what seems safe, hiding vulnerabilities and differences that might invite disapproval. Real intimacy, being genuinely seen and accepted, can only occur when you risk revealing parts of yourself that might not be welcomed. The depth of connection you experience with others will always be directly proportional to your willingness to risk rejection. Perhaps most powerful is the recognition that you have been rejecting yourself all along, disowning aspects of your personality, censoring your expression, abandoning your desires, all to avoid the possibility that others might do the same. The most painful rejection is not what comes from others, but this constant self-rejection performed in anticipation of external disapproval. What might become possible if you committed to never again rejecting yourself, even if it meant others sometimes would? What voice might speak through you? What gifts might you offer? What life might you live if self-acceptance became non-negotiable? There comes a moment in the journey when you realize that the fear of rejection has not been protecting you from pain, but from life itself. Like a child who never removes their water wings, never discovering they've known how to swim all along, we cling to our protective strategies long past their usefulness, never experiencing the exhilaration of moving through the world undefended. The question shifts from, how can I avoid rejection, to, what becomes possible when I no longer organize my life around this fear? Authenticity is not a destination, but a practice, a moment-by-moment choice to express what is true for you, despite the risk of disapproval. Notice the small, daily opportunities to practice this choice. The impulse to laugh genuinely rather than politely. The desire to express appreciation without minimizing it. The opinion that differs from the group consensus. Each of these moments presents a choice between rejection avoidance and authentic expression. The revolution happens not in grand declarations, but in these quiet decisions to prioritize truth over safety. As you practice risking rejection, you'll discover that others' responses have never been within your control. The carefully constructed persona, the strategic self-presentation, the vigilant monitoring of others' reactions, none of these actually guaranteed acceptance. People respond not just to what you present, but through the filter of their own fears, needs, histories, and limitations. This recognition liberates you from the exhausting responsibility of managing others' perceptions. Your task is not to ensure positive responses, but simply to express yourself clearly and authentically, allowing others the freedom to respond as they will. There is a profound dignity in standing in your truth, regardless of its reception. Consider those historical figures who spoke unpopular truths, created misunderstood art, or loved in ways their society rejected. Their legacy endures, not because they were universally accepted in their time, many were deeply rejected, but because they refused to dilute their expression to avoid disapproval. This is not arrogance, but integrity. The commitment to allowing what moves through you to emerge undistorted by fear, even when that means standing alone. The capacity to offer genuine acceptance to others grows in direct proportion to your ability to risk rejection yourself. When you no longer organize your life around avoiding disapproval, you develop a generosity toward others' authentic expression. Even when it differs from your preferences, you recognize that their truth, like yours, deserves to exist undiluted by fear. This is how authentic community forms, not through mutual performance of acceptability, but through the shared courage to be seen as you are and to truly see others in return. What becomes possible when rejection no longer determines the boundaries of your life? Relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than strategic self-presentation. Work that expresses your actual gifts rather than just your marketable skills. Creative expression uncensored by anticipated criticism. The energy previously consumed by impression management becomes available for presence, connection, and contribution. The mental bandwidth once occupied by rejection avoidance opens for curiosity, play, and genuine engagement with what matters to you. Perhaps most profound is the discovery that the authentic self is inherently resilient. When your sense of worth is built upon the shifting sands of others' approval, each rejection threatens your entire identity. But as you practice standing in your truth, regardless of its reception, you develop a relationship with yourself that remains stable even when connections with others change. You discover that your value does not depend on universal acceptance, but on your own commitment to living with integrity, expressing what is true for you, and contributing your unique perspective to the world. The ultimate liberation comes with the recognition that rejection is not just survivable, but necessary for a life of meaning and authentic connection. Each no clarifies your path, revealing where you don't belong so you can find where you do. Each non-resonance with one person or opportunity creates space for deeper resonance elsewhere. In this understanding, rejection transforms from an enemy to be avoided into a guide, helping you discover your true direction, your genuine community, and ultimately, your authentic self, the one that has been waiting patiently beneath the strategies and performances for the courage to finally live unhidden. In the end, perhaps the most profound act of courage is not eliminating the fear of rejection, but choosing to move with it as a companion rather than a commander. The fear may never fully disappear. This ancient survival mechanism embedded in our nervous system, this existential awareness of our fundamental separateness. But it can be transformed from a prison into a teacher, from a tyrant into a voice among many that informs, but does not control your choices. There is a quiet power in acknowledging, yes, I feel afraid of their disapproval, and still, I will express what is true for me. This is not fearlessness, but something more human, more honest, and ultimately more liberating, the willingness to tremble and speak anyway, to feel the ancient fear of exile and still step forward into the vulnerable territory of authentic expression. For it is only by risking rejection that we discover how unnecessarily we have rejected ourselves and how the life we've been longing for has been waiting just beyond the boundaries of our fear. Patient for the day when our desire for authentic connection finally outweighs our need for perfect protection. As the sun sets on our journey together, remember this: in the quiet moments when you stand at the crossroads between safety and truth, between hiding and being seen, you are not merely making a choice about that single moment. You are choosing who you will become. Each time you honor your authentic voice despite the trembling, you reclaim a piece of your soul that fear had held hostage. The path of authenticity is not strewn with constant validation or unbroken success. It is marked by the courage to remain open in a world that often rewards those who close. Your worth was never found in universal acceptance, but in the integrity with which you've carried your unique light through darkness. And perhaps, in the end, the greatest rejection we fear is not from others at all, but from life itself. The rejection of having lived so cautiously that we reach our final day wondering who we might have been had we allowed ourselves to be fully known. Today, as you leave this moment, carry with you not the absence of fear, but a new relationship with it, one where fear serves as the honored messenger of what matters most to you, rather than the architect of your limitations. For it is only when we are brave enough to be rejected for who we truly are that we discover those who will love us for the very same reason. If something in this journey resonated with your own experience, if you recognized yourself in these shadows or glimpsed possibilities you hadn't considered before, I invite you to share that moment in the comments below. Your voice matters here, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you'd like to continue exploring these depths together, subscribe to this channel where we'll keep peeling back the layers that separate us from our most authentic lives. The subscribe button isn't just about notifications. It's about committing to your own journey of self-discovery alongside a community walking the same path. Thank you for the courage it took to stay present through these uncomfortable truths. Your willingness to look inward is the rarest form of bravery in a world that rewards distraction.